everyone. We're going to go ahead and get this meeting started. And we're going to go ahead and let our city manager, Michael Lawson, start it off.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Tonight we have a joint work session for all of you. Thank you for joining us. This is my first one of these. We appreciate your time. Tonight we're going to be talking about short-term rentals, a topic that's been top of mind for a lot of us for quite a while now. We as staff have spent the last few months doing some research around this topic in the community, meeting with different stakeholders, hearing their opinions, researching how other cities have addressed this very same topic. A lot of folks have spent a lot of time on this topic. So we're going to share some of that with you as well. Excuse me. For tonight, the agenda is we're going to have Rob Feltz, our assistant to the city manager, walk through the research the city has done. He's in addition to the research, he's going to give you some data on short-term rentals in Woodland Park as of this moment, and also walk through some potential policy considerations for you all to consider if you want to change the way the city handles short-term rentals in the future. Things for you to think about tonight is mostly a briefing from the work we've done to help set the stage for a broader policy conversation for you all a little bit later. We anticipate having a little bit of time at the end of the presentation for questions or comments, but really staff's goal for tonight is to provide for you the information, start thinking about it. The plan is in the next couple weeks, month or so, we're going to have some kind of public engagement process where anyone from the public who's interested can come and speak. Tonight, obviously, we don't have a lot of time for that, so we won't be having public comment, but please know that we will have that opportunity for the public here very soon. We're still working out the details on that, but the folks, anyone can come and be a part of that. And then after that, the idea would be get some feedback. If there's any other things we haven't taken into account in terms of problems out there or potential solutions to those problems, we will take note of that. And we'll come back to you all for more dialogue and to get some policy direction from you. Hopefully folks mostly come out on the same page for that. And we will put together a draft policy document for you all to work through the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council. So does that all work for folks? Is that all clear?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. And with that, I will turn it over to Rob Feltz.
Hello, City Council, Planning Commission. Thanks. Most of the council knows me because I bother them all the time. Go to the Planning Commission. Rob Feltz, assistant to the city manager, and the sound guy sucks.
Okay, so all right, so like Michael said, I just have a presentation for you guys. I'll go through it as quick as I can and get the point across, and then you guys should have some time to talk and deliberate amongst yourselves. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to stop me and I can ask them as we go. All right, so this is our agenda. Well, we'll go over definitions, talk about some different problems. We have 6 of them. Talk about some concerns and then what we found in our research, and then some potential problems and some options that are available to you. So these are our definitions. The big thing here is the difference between an owner occupied and a non-owner occupied. So for the purpose of this briefing, an owner occupied is someone that lives in the residence and they rent out a portion of the residence. And really, I don't think like, if you think you're traditional, somebody's just renting out their back room. That's not really what we're talking about here today. It's more the non-owner occupied STRs. And that's where the owner doesn't live in the building or maybe even in the city, county, or state. And then a short-term rental, we're defining that as anything, that's rented out in a period of less than 30 days, a dwelling unit rented out.
Rob, these are proposed definitions, correct?
These are just the definitions that are kind of the most traditional used across different municipalities. As we go further, you guys are more than welcome to change this for what language you want to use in our policies, if we have one that you choose.
Yeah, and I guess my point is we do not have in our municipal code definitions for short-term rentals, owner-occupied short-term rentals, or non-owner occupied short-term rentals at the present time.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right, so we talked to different members of the community. So we talked to residents, we talked to business owners, we talked to hotel owners, we talked to people that own STRs. We talked to other municipalities. But so these are some of the big takeaways and concerns. For safety, of course, that's everyone's concern. Like, and these are some of the things. Does an STR, is it required the same safety requirements as a hotel? Like a hotel, they follow a fire code, they follow different things. Parking, things like that, extra traffic inside the neighborhoods. Those are a big concern across the board from everybody. Equality between STRs and hotel industries. As you guys know, STRs are taxed on a residential basis. And actually, sorry, I'm going to go through these one at a time. So let me go forward a little bit.
Can I just make a clarification?
Yes.
This is regarding property taxes.
Yes.
It's not regarding sales tax or lodging tax. The differentiation is in their way they're taxed for property taxes.
Between hotels and short-term rentals, correct?
Correct. Thank you.
Sorry if I said that wrong. Okay, so here's just some things that we heard that kind of caught our attention as we were talking to the community. Some people believe there are over 300 short-term rentals in the city of Woodland Park. We haven't found that to be true. And some of that may be, I mean, we just had our election and it was really confusing on who was allowed to vote based on whether or not they lived in the city or not. Because as you all know, we have little pockets of county within the city, and then there's places on the outskirts. And I think some of those numbers are getting wrapped up and they're elevating it a little bit up to that 300 mark, but I don't think we're quite there from what we've found out. Another thing is all residential property is being bought up by investors for use as STRs. That's something that we can't really confirm or deny right now. We're looking into it and trying to figure it out, get a better picture on it, but we can't really say yes or no. The erosion of community culture, that's just kind of, it's an opinion. So some people believe that it affects. So, you have neighborhoods now that are being occupied by people that are there for the weekend. And people don't take care of things that they're going to leave in 2 days, and there's really no repercussions for whatever they do. And again, that's some people have that opinion, some people don't. It's kind of even across the board. Crime, looking into this and trying to dig into that is hard, because when the police officers pull someone over, they don't say, hey, are you here living in a short-term rental? So they don't really know. One of the only complaints that we did find was a neighbor complained about the parking, and that was brought to the owner of the STR. The owner of the STR put a parking diagram on whatever platform they were using, Airbnb or whatever. So they tried to rectify the situation. Parking was an issue. They put a parking diagram on there and they made sure that people know where they're supposed to park. But again, crime is a hard one for us to look at because of the way we track crime. Impact on tourism created if STRs are regulated. So some people believe that we don't have enough hotel space to accommodate all the tourists that want to come up here. So this expands the number of temporary lodging that we have. I haven't really dove into that to see if all of our hotels are completely full every weekend, but it's consideration. So the livelihood for residents that operate STRs for a living. So a lot of STR owners, like people have quit their jobs, and people are making a living on this. So that's a concern for a lot of people too. It's like further regulation or regulation at all could put a damper on that. All right. Yes.
So you said that you couldn't confirm whether or not the property is being bought up by investors. When they apply for a business license and they have an address there, we're not able to confirm who owns Airbnbs or short-term rentals here in Woodland Park, as opposed to those who own and live outside of Woodland Park.
Yes. So right now there's an issue with the software we use to track our business licenses. And so all those addresses are kind of jumbled right now. So we're trying to decipher that and get it all figured out. But yes, that's the solution that we plan on taking. We just can't do it right now. Okay, so you have in front of you a map, and I'm sorry, I know you guys can't read this, but you guys all have it printed out in front of you. And then, so basically this goes, and here's another issue, like with some of the numbers. So numbers changed a bit, like at the last minute, and I didn't have time to update this map. So you're gonna see, if you count them, there are 77 dots on that map. If you look at our total of all, our total, we have 130 active STRs in Woodland Park right now that we're able to find. That's out of, you guys can read it better than I can, 3,400 available parcels for dwelling, which is about 3.7% of our available housing parcels. And then it's broken down what percentage of STRs take up what zones.
Hey, Rob,
Yes.
could you explain the software program that the city uses to track STRs?
So we use Muni Revs and Lodging Revs. So what they do is they scour for advertisements. I mean, and a lot of people just say, hey, I want to start an STR, and they come into us and say, I want to operate a business. What do I need to do? And they apply for a business license and they start it that way. For those that don't, because some people just aren't aware that they need to, Muni Revs and Lodging, it's the same company, right? But they go out, they scour advertisements. So Airbnb, Home Away, all those things, all the places that people advertise. And they just look for people that are advertising STRs in the city limits. And then they compare it to the list of people that have business licenses. If they don't have a business license, then they reach out to the city and they say, hey, you're out of tolerance. You need to go in and get a business license and get everything set up straight.
And then the city contacts that address?
So the vendor contacts.
The vendor
address,
does?
yes.
Okay.
So they reach out to them and they let us know as well.
Okay, so the city does not contact them and say you've got 90 days to come into compliance or something like that?
Is there a point? No.
Okay.
When you say 77 active, you're talking about active establishments that have been identified, not 77 establishments that have an active business license.
So we have, I'll get to the slide with that, but we have 130 active STRs right now in the city. Just there'll be a slide on that one in just a few seconds.
Okay.
All right. So here's our current stats. So 130 current STRs in the city. That's 3.74% of our available parcels for dwelling units. And then it's broken down by each, just like it is on the map that you have in front of you. So these are our active versus advertised. So active is they have a business license to operate. And then advertise is what's being advertised. So in a perfect world, if we were capturing everybody that was running a business, these lines would be even. And these are cumulative. So they build up over a year. So that's why 2019 is bigger than, or smaller than 20 and so forth. But in 2019, let's see, so we were at 59 active and 75 advertised. And then we incorporated Muni Revs and Lodging Revs and like the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. In 2020, we had 63 active and 105 advertised. 21, it's 113, and then 183 advertised. And then 22 to date, we have 130 and then 183 advertised. And some of these too, like, I mean, if I'm sure maybe everybody's used Airbnb, but they don't give the locations of their homes. So some of it's kind of fuzzy. So some of this that we're not catching, or that, you know, like in 2022, we have 183 versus 130. Some of that could be where they're actually in the county and we just can't see it. Another reason too, the reason 183 is the same for both is we haven't updated that information for 2022 yet. So we know it's at least 183, but we'll find out at the end of the year what it grows to. Any questions on this slide? Sir.
Yeah, just to be clear, the number is not 130 in Woodland Park. It's between 130 and some other number, maybe 180.
Correct. We have 130 licensed SCR. So to answer your question from earlier, sir. Okay, so this is a pretty important slide, and I just went with 2021 because we started tracking this. So the ZDP versus STR business license. So I pulled from the planning department how many permits that we authorized for dwelling units in 2021 and 2022. So in 2021, we pulled the there were 60 permits for new dwelling units to be constructed in Woodland Park. There were 50 applications for new STRs. So 5 out of 6, we created 60 new homes, but then STRs, we created 50. That being said, I don't know how many of those were, somebody that wanted to rent them out for the weekend or somebody that wanted to rent out a room or things like that. We've just never tracked them that close.
So Rob, if I might,
Yes.
I think it's important to clarify that although there were 60 ZDPs issued for construction, it's not directly correlated to the number of STRs. 50 of those 60 are not STRs. It's STRs of
Right.
the whole city, not just the ones that were new construction, correct?
Correct. So it's saying that we increased our dwelling units in the city by 60, but we also increased our STRs by 50. Not the same buildings,
Right.
but the
Thank you.
number.
Robert, I have a question about that too. The STR licenses for 2022, 130. Do you know what part of those are owner occupied for any period of time, or are those that are just simply empty dwellings that are rented out?
Yeah, so we don't know, we don't track it close enough to know, like I said, if it's somebody's renting a room or if somebody's renting a whole house. There is a part of it, and I will say 90% of them are whole house SCRs. And then these numbers are to date in 2022, and we are at 13 GDPs and 18 new STRs.
Can we assume that because STRs are not provided for under the zoning code, that zoning development permits have not been issued for them?
I mean, I don't think they wouldn't need a zoning develop if it's an already built house, right?
Correct. I think what Rob's really trying to illustrate is the fact that our available housing stock is eroding. And he's just looking at what gets pulled into the STR pool versus how many new homes we're actually bringing online. So that's the real point he's trying to illustrate with this particular slide.
All right, anything else on this one? Okay, so these are the 6 items that we were talking about for problems, potential problems, and these are some of the things that we found. Like I said, everybody's concerned about water, so occupancy, fire. A lot of times you'll see STRs that are like a 4-bedroom that are renting out, like, let's say, hey, we have an availability of 16 people or whatever. There's no regulation on it, so whatever they advertise is what they can do. Wastewater, and this isn't my ballpark at all, but commercial sewage systems versus residential sewage systems being different. So you get that many people in a house, what problems does it cause with the waste system? Parking, as you guys know, and then sanitation, that's just trash. Again, back to the waste systems and things like that. But large group gatherings gather a lot of trash. Crime, and this is like trying to figure out how we can determine whether crime is a nuisance or if it's actual criminal. And again, the way we track crime right now, it's like we don't know who's a resident of an STR or who's using an STR. So some potential ways of doing this are limiting the occupancy based on bedrooms, and then and the number of vehicles based on the occupancy as well, and then requiring a point of contact for someone that can respond. So someone local that can be there within 2 hours, whether it's a neighbor concern or if somebody that's renting the SDR has a concern, somebody that they can get a hold of. So equalities between STRs and hotel industry. So lodging tax is 5.7%, and that's across the board, whether or not you're an STR or whether or not you're a hotel, bed and breakfast or whatever. Property tax is 29% commercial, and that's what hotels pay. Residential is 7.15%, and that's what STRs pay. Interesting enough, the hotel owners weren't concerned about this. Like, this didn't bother them. And then local licensing. So both hotels and STRs are required to have a business license. And then the big thing too is inspections. What inspections are hotels required to have? What different requirements do they have on them for occupancy? What requirements do they have on them for fire escapes, things like that. So both hotels and STRs currently pay lodging tax. Hotels, it's a difference. And some people have, and even the state level, that people have talked about charging STRs commercial tax, but honestly, it's outside of our purview. That's like a state level thing, and it's just an administrative nightmare.
I have a question about that. I posted earlier in the week when we got the slides in advance. The STRs that are actually in commercial zones, could they be taxed as businesses? I know there are homes that are in commercial zones, and if they were full-time STRs, could they be taxed as a commercial entity?
I asked that question of Mike
The assessor.
Akana and Colt Simmons,
Mhm.
that they cannot at current, with the current rules by the state, they cannot right now. It's under discussion for changing that, but currently it has not been changed.
I think the answer I had received is if they were in a residential zone, they could not at this time. But then you look at this and there's 36 that are in commercial zones now. So does that override what the current thinking is? I'm asking this of the city attorney.
No, unless they're a hotel or a commercial lodging. Right now, if it's a residential unit, the current state regulation says that they're assessed at the residential level, but there are efforts to change that in the next couple of years in the state legislature.
Do you know what lane they're going down? If, I would see it, incrementally that, okay, here's a house that's been in a commercial zone for years and years and only used as an STR. Would that be a place to start?
More the use, if it's more, I've been hearing either a majority or if almost every day is used as a short-term rental, whether or not it's in a residential zone, it's still a commercial use. So the current thinking for the state, the people who are trying to change the state law is that it's regards to the use. If the unit is being used for a majority of the days in the year as a commercial lodging use, then it should be assessed at a commercial rate, whether or not the zone is, whether or not it's zoned as commercial or not.
So at this point in time, really the city can only address STRs in terms of the lodging tax and a business license and compliance with code.
Well, you could pass regulations that are, very strict as to how, how different guidelines and inspections and higher license fee, and there's revocation provisions that you could add. There's a lot of options, but not as it relates to property tax assessment.
And we had interacted earlier this week on that same question, as you mentioned, and Jeff Wilson, also Wilson Williams, mentioned that neither the city nor the county assessor has the authority to change how these things are taxed at the local level. The assessor has to adhere to state guidelines set out. I can't remember which state department it is, but they're very tightly defined guidelines on what types of properties are assessed at which rate.
And I think that's an important point to make tonight, that going forward, the commission and the council can only address code and regulation as it applies to, restrictions or prohibitions or licensing or lodging tax. There's no debate right now on whether or not a property could be taxed at the commercial property tax level.
I would say not here in our area. I don't know where we are in the current legislative session, but last year there was a bill that was proposed. I believe it died in committee to begin assessing STRs at the 29% commercial rate. It went down pretty hard, but I don't know if that's been revived for this session.
Thank you.
Okay.
I do want to bring up one thing just so that I'm understanding correctly and the citizens understand. When you use the terminology pay, by the law, property taxes are paid by the entity that owns the property, the term paying. Lodging tax, though,
It's collected.
is an authority that the city grants to the property owners to collect and remit, meaning they don't necessarily have to pay. They're authorized to collect from the guests and render it to the city. Now, there's a subtle difference. Now, if they choose to pay it out of their rate, that's up to them, but they are authorized to actually tack it on, just like on a hotel bill. You see the rate for the room, and at the bottom, you always see some taxes that are collected and remitted to the taxing authority. The same goes with the lodging tax for short-term rentals and for hotels.
As well as
currently.
sales tax. They are also.
Yeah, I'm not talking sales tax.
Okay,
I'm
but
simply
they
talking
also are
lodging.
subject to the sales tax in the same
Yes.
fashion.
Yes.
Okay, so incongruencies between STRs. So this is like just how people manage their STRs. So there's a lot of people probably in this room that they really go the extra mile, and they really want to make just a nice place for people to come and visit the community. They advertise for local restaurants. They have books out for people to see that come in, like, oh, these are the restaurants we can eat. They notify their neighbors. They say, hey, we're running an STR. Here's my phone number. If you have a problem, I'll be there in a minute. They do minimum night stays. There's age requirements to prevent just a bunch of kids from just having a party. They don't allow things like weddings and things like that. The problem is, like, they do that stuff just because they want to be respected in the community, and they want to run a respectable business. But that's not a regulation. They just do it. So there's others that don't. So there's a difference. So there's these people that do it, they go out, they spend extra time, they spend extra money, and it just creates a gap between those that do and those that don't. There are some that don't live here. And then there are some that these properties are maybe next door to them. So they still care about the neighborhood, and they really go the extra mile. But there's definitely a big gap there between those that do, those that don't. So by placing guidelines that say, hey, we're going to require you to do these things, then, the people that are already doing it, great. The people that aren't, it's going to be better for the community. So weakening community and residential character affects on availability of affordable housing. So this, like the homeowners association. So right now, everybody that lives in a homeowners association knows some of them are very active and some of them aren't. Some of them have guidelines that they enforce, and some of them don't. At the city, if someone comes in here and requests a business license to run an STR in a community that has covenants against it, they'll get a business license. It's up to the HOA to enforce their own rules. We don't enforce those for them. That being said, like, the remedy for that is just coordination between the city and HOAs, like, opening communication and just talking, them letting us know what their rules are, us letting us know when people are wanting to do something that's against their rules. Transient neighborhoods, that's just, we've talked about earlier, where, things are changing from, a neighborhood full of families and kids and whatever, to just people that come and go. You don't know who your neighbors are. It's kind of getting that way anyway, but even worse when they change every week. And then the effects on affordable housing. We've just talked about, like, the more full home STRs that come in there, the less houses that we have. The average, I didn't put it in this presentation, but the average home cost for an STR, according to Zillow, is about $500,000. So that's like the middle ground for people that are purchasing houses and running STRs out of them. So the last two, potential regulating zones, or by zones, or zoning districts, and good neighbor policies. And I have some examples of those at the end. Any questions on this one? So a big problem with any sort of guidelines, regulations, or whatever, it's the enforcement of it. So it's a huge increased workload. The remedy here is to just use those fees that we bring in to help supplement code enforcement, planning, whoever has to go through to do whatever inspections are necessary, just to track it all. Any questions on this one?
If any of that, can any of that be done by software? That workload?
I mean, some of it as far as the tracking, but like, and we'll talk about it here in a second. A lot of times, like some cities have people, they'll bring in an affidavit that says, I have fire extinguishers in my house. I have fire escapes marked. I have, whatever. And there is no inspection. It's just an affidavit. They say we have it. So it doesn't cost the city because nobody ever goes out there and looks. So if you want to go that route, like it costs more money to do so. Potential policy pitfalls. So long-term, this is just describing the cascade of what we've seen happen. Like, people used to rent out their homes for as long as they could, just to have that steady someone in there. Then it changed to the sharing economy where people rent out extra space, kind of the bed and breakfast idea, but on a smaller scale. And then now it's becoming more of a commercial operation where you have corporate entities purchasing residential properties inside a neighborhood and then running a business. And it's just kind of just the way things are flowing. Property rights is a huge issue. But it just becomes convoluted because they're not just talking about the property rights of homeowners. Now you have corporate entities owning homes. And then you have the community, and that has property rights entitled to. It's just who owns them. Regulation surrounding areas. As most people are regulating STRs, and the more they do it around us, the more it's going to push them here. It's it's Colorado Springs and Manitou and Green Mountain Falls pushes them out. They're just going to push them further here, or maybe this is the epicenter. I mean, it's just, people do it for people to come enjoy the great outdoors, and then they do it for people in Colorado Springs that want to go to the museums or the Olympic Center and all that stuff. But it changes the landscape of, as regulation happens, it just pushes the presence of STRs out further. We've talked about loss of affordable housing, hazards of over and under regulation. There are pros, and I know, I'm sorry, I've really harped on the cons of this, but it does bring tourism to the area. It brings business. It does good things. So your potential of over regulating, and people are, like I said, people have quit their jobs. This is their livelihood now. So over regulation could hamper all that. Under regulation could be the opposite, where all of our property gets bought up by corporate entities, and we don't have places for people that work at the city to live, or the waiters and waitresses at the restaurants. And then there are enforcement issues that we talked about. Like, that's a huge problem with anything. Most communities, citizen policing is kind of where they get their complaints on this, or they find somebody running an STR that's not supposed to be. It usually just comes from their neighbor turning them in. So, like I said, we talked to different municipalities. Well, to be honest here, I talked to Colorado Springs. Everybody else I read about. So Colorado Springs, they started regulating, at least on their ordinances, in 2019. Their population is 464,000 plus. They have a registration fee of 119, and they have a renewal fee every year of $119. They have over 2,000 STRs right now, and they fund a planner and a code enforcement officer to handle STRs out of these fees. 2,000 STRs, you can do that. So they also require an additional sales tax license. So they have to buy an STR license, and then you have to buy a sales tax license. So they restrict owner occupied versus owner or non-owner occupied by zone. So just to read something from theirs, and sorry, I can't get far enough from my paper. You can still hear me, but owner occupied short-term rentals are those properties that are physically occupied by the owner for no less than 185 days per year. Owner occupied short-term rentals are allowed in lawful dwelling units. You cannot rent out a tough shed, tent, things like that, in zones where residential units are permitted. So, and then non-owner occupied short-term rental units are permitted Non-owner occupied short-term rental unit permits are not given for residential zones. So you have to live in the house to have an STR in the non-commercial, in a residential zone. They did grandfather everyone that already had a license before December of 2019. Those are non-transferable, so they're tied to the owner. And when the owner sells the home or passes away or whatever, then that home is no longer an STR. And then in their commercial zones, owner occupied, not occupied, it's not really, it's not limited there. They do have an occupancy limit. So they do 2 people per bedroom plus 2. So a four bedroom house can have 10 people. All right. So North Glen. So again, they also started in 2019. They have a population of over 38,000 people. Registration fee of $175, an annual fee of $150. Also non-transferable. They do an inspection affidavit. So the person that wants an STR brings in an affidavit and says, hey, they sign off swearing to that or attesting that all that stuff is done. And sorry to go back to Colorado Springs, the way they do it is it's the same way with the inspection. They come in and they sign a form that says, I have notified my HOA if they're grandfathered. Their HOA is aware. They have all these other things that are good. And then over the next year, the code enforcement officer inspects it. And if it comes out that they didn't notify their neighbors like they were supposed to, or they didn't notify their HOA, then they can't renew for the next year and they lose their license. But it gives the code enforcement officer a year to work it out. So if they apply for the license, they get it for a year. As long as they did what they were supposed to do, they'll renew it. If they don't, they'll lose it. So North Glen limits parking. They also have an additional business license fee of $15. Let's see. Thought I had something marked for them. No. Okay, so Georgetown. So Georgetown is interesting in that they have a $500 fee with a $500 annual renewal fee on top of a business license that can cost up to $256, but their business license is very confusing. It starts out at $80 and you can like add bells and whistles for some extra money. But so everything being said, if you pay $256 for your fee on top of $500, and then their inspection is done by the city and it costs the applicant $75. And then they also limit parking to, they require their STRs to have 1 parking space per bedroom, and that space has to be off the street. So it has to be on the property. So the inspection that they conduct is a life safety inspection. And that's all I got for them. So the Netherlands, sorry. 2019 population of 1,336. They have $150 annual fee and a $75 renewal fee. They change up their license based on whether or not people live in it. And so to go over their rules, so they have 3 types of license. So they have a primary residence where the host is present, and a primary resident where the host is not present, and then a Class C license. That's a non-primary resident in basically a city business district, general commercial district, or an industrial district. So basically for primary residents, a licensed premise with a host present may be rented as a short-term rental for an unlimited number of days during the calendar year. A licensed premise with a no host present shall not be rented more than 180 days a year. And a primary resident is established by the person's actual physical occupancy of the domicile and is demonstrated by driver's licenses, voter registration, things like that. Non-primary residents in certain zoning districts. So that's basically just anybody that, whether or not they live inside the dwelling or not, if it's in a commercial zone, they have the permit. Permits are the same price. And then they have a tiered fine system. So for fines for violations, they start at $150 for the first one, second one, $750, third one, you lose your license. And that's it. And things are pretty much unlimited in those commercial zones, like I said. And the owner performs these inspections, brings in an affidavit, says, hey, these things are all good. So that's all I have for case studies. Options. So this is what we currently do in Woodland Park. We require someone to come in and receive a business license. And we require people to collect lodging tax. And that's it. 35 now. So these are just some options. And again, these are conversation starters and just kind of ideas. But prohibiting non-owner occupied STRs in single family residential zones, exempting those that already have licenses until that property ownership changes. Prohibiting STRs in multifamily zones. When you have STRs appearing in apartment buildings or you're really affordable housing. Yeah, it eats up that stock for when duplexes go to STRs, things like that. Prohibiting subleasing for STR purposes. This just prevents me from renting a house from the mayor and then renting it out as an STR. Regulating STRs throughout the city. Having a certain license, like not just a business license, but an STR license would make it a lot easier on us to track. Like getting these numbers has been extremely difficult because we have to dig them out from all the other businesses and things like that. So having a separate license. Opening that communication with the HOAs and the covenants, like we should have, like, it's like if it's kind of their rules and we shouldn't really help people sneak past them. Occupancy is limited based on bedroom space. That's going to cut down on your parking problems. It's just a safer environment. And most communities also have something about no events, like no weddings, no big parties, no things like that. And then incorporating good neighbor requirements. So just to go over a couple of those, it's like having a local agent, like someone that somebody can call and be on in a certain number of hours or an hour. General respect for neighbors, notifying your neighbor that, hey, I'm going to be running an STR next door. Noise and outdoor lighting, maintenance of property, like owners should come. I mean, yet most people they contract out the cleaning. They don't even show up on the property. I won't say most, but they have that option. Somebody comes in and cleans, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. But garbage disposal, the parking we've talking about. And then here in Woodland Park, one big thing is talking to residents and warning them about wildlife, like, and fires. People come from out of state and they don't understand hey, it's very dangerous to throw a cigarette butt out your window here. And people from the East Coast, they don't get that. So, having those, whether or not it's a poster or whatever. And then pets, cleaning up after just good neighbor stuff. And then basically having tenants sign that or agree to it or whatever. So those are just some ideas of good neighbor requirements. A lot of people here, they have Ring cameras like on their STRs and they say, hey, you can have 4 people and 2 cars. And if they show up with 8 people and 4 cars, then the owner shows up and knocks on the door and says, hey, some of this has to go. Like, that's just a good policy. Okay, so the enforcement mechanism, like I said, it's extra work. So using some of the lodging tax and the licensing fee to supplement that code enforcement. Coming up with an inspection process, whether or not that's a sworn affidavit or if it's actually a code inspector going out and doing it. Fines, like what happens when you don't follow the rules, become out of compliance? Do you lose your license? Do you get fined? Just things to think about. Next steps, so from staff, like our recommendation is like coming up with a community group of STR owners, of residents, of council members, planning commission members, restaurant owners, all the people in the community that are involved or want to have a say. And and then just coming up with a round table and talking about different options, and then letting people hear from each other's perspective. Because I think a lot of time in our society, like we're so polarized, nobody cares what the other guy has to say. But if we put them in a room and let them talk to each other, then people will get where other people are coming from a little bit better. And then from that round table, we formulate recommendations and for a work session with you gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. And then from that, you guys can direct us on where you want to go with policy council. And then we revise that policy, give it to the planning commission, and then they make their recommendations on it and forward it to the council for their recommendations and approval. And that's all I have today, unless you guys have any questions of me.
Rob, was there any conversation about limiting to a certain percentage in the city of licensing for STRs?
There are, and that's one of the options. So caps, like I think Green Mountain Falls, economy is based on short-term rentals, but they have a cap. And there are, and this is your guys' decision. Just the thing that I think about with caps, it's like who gets it and who doesn't. Who gets to choose, who gets the ones that, is it everybody that already has one gets to keep it? Or is there a lottery, or is that, is there an equitable way of doing that?
I'd like to make a comment with regard to your slide about the 60-some building permits and the 50-some STR licenses.
Yes, sir.
One thing that you didn't mention that I'd like you to think about when you're investigating. One thing I've noticed living here is that there's a number of homes owned by people who don't live here year round.
Yes, sir.
And with the advent of VRBO and Airbnb and they're being more commonly used, I suspicion that some of these STRs are people who bought homes here. It's their vacation home. They just come here part-time, and they're now taking advantage of that house property that they bought to earn some extra income by renting it out part-time when they're not here. I think that's another opportunity, that you have houses that are already sold, owned by people who don't live here year-round, that are just renting them out as STRs because they'd like to get the income off of it, and have somebody actually maybe get the benefit of coming here and seeing Woodland Park like they do part-time.
If they use one of the established platforms, then in theory, the software the city uses, they'll catch those folks. If they're using Airbnb.
I'm
or
just saying that
VRBO.
the STR licenses may not be consuming available homes like we think. If you just look at those numbers,
Right.
it could be that these are homes that are already not available because they've been owned for years. For an example, there's 3 cabins built on South Avenue 90 years ago by 3 Methodist pastors from Kansas. And each of those 3 cabins is still owned by the same family 90 years later. And so one of the owners is a friend of mine from high school from Kansas City, where I grew up. And he owns that cabin and he rents it out to friends and family. He's been doing it for as long as he's owned it, and his family before that. And his grandfather, they would come here to get out of the heat from a summer in Kansas. So that property's been that way. It was bought that way. It was built for that purpose. It's being used for that for 90 years in Woodland Park. Now they've got Airbnb involved and they have a license and they do it with everything that's been suggested. And I don't see anything with the regulations that's onerous that he couldn't comply with. I'm just saying, I think you need to look at the STR usage. There's a lot of people who buy homes here who don't plan to live here full time till maybe they retire. So we, just be that needs to be considered as another source of where STRs are coming from. It's not just people buying up homes to make STRs.
Yes, sir.
So Rob, on that issue of the 60-50, do you have any data yet that tells you of the 60 new builds, how many of those have been allocated or people have applied for business license for an SDR?
No, I do not.
And is that something
out-of-state homeowners we have in Woodland Park?
No, so the software that we're using, everything between up to 2021, like I have that information, but everything like from January on, it's not It's in there. We just got to figure out how to get it out.
But you did have that information a few weeks ago from 2021, and it was, 1/3 of the STRs that have licenses were out-of-state owners.
Mhm.
No, and we looked at that information, no out of country, but at
Correct.
least 1/3 of those were out-of-state owners.
Mhm.
Might not be relevant.
And once we figure out how to get the program to work for us, I can get that updated data. I just didn't want to provide you guys with 2-year-old information that may have changed because some of those may not be active anymore.
Well, Rob, the area that I'd like to address or find out data on is that whole area of, like, for example, I only know anecdotally, but over in Baldwin, there's 4 new duplexes that have been built. Well, from what I understand, an investor came in and bought 3 of them for SDRs. The problem I have with that is that when we are looking at affordable housing and housing our professionals and our teachers and our police force, et cetera here, if the SDRs are taking away from that new build and that new stock needed for either rental or ownership, that's an area that I think is important. What Ken talks about, I think, is fine. I don't see an issue with that type of short-term rental at all, but I do see if the market's gobbling up new builds specifically for SDRs, I think that's a bigger concern for us to look at from my eyes anyway.
Just in response to that, from my point of view as a real estate agent, if I'm representing a client, it would be outside of my purview to, I could certainly not represent the client that wanted to buy a new build and make it a short-term rental. That would be my prerogative as a real estate agent. But I would not be, it would be out of place for me to tell him that he cannot do that. Because that's a right that we have in purchasing real estate. So that's a personal dilemma for me as a real estate agent or any other agent that represents those buyers.
But Kelly, as planning commission and the city council could look at that as one of the cures for perceived issues with STRs is to prohibit the use of multifamily housing to include duplexes
Sure.
as STRs.
Sure. And that makes sense. But from the perspective of a buyer wanting to do something like that,
But
that's
right now we can't,
we-
nor should we.
nor should we, exactly. But I agree with what you say, Carol. Thank you.
One of the only ways you could limit that is owner occupied too, because you have a constitutional right to purchase the property no matter who you are. So it makes it difficult because you can't start to have prejudice against who's purchasing property and for what purpose. But if they're owner occupied or non-owner occupied in zoning, then we have a route for that. So.
Well, if we place restrictions on the licenses based on proximity, like our mother-in-law apartments currently,
Yeah.
they have to be a certain space apart. That would limit buying up complete complexes. And if there was a cap on the number, you come in to buy 4 units, you might only get 1 to be licensed for that use. It will help disperse and limit that from happening.
Just as a statement, not a question, is that we're not reinventing the wheel here. Many communities have already dealt with this. There are good tools available for us to use, and we can kind of gauge to the level we feel comfortable that allows people to use their property the way they wish to and protect that neighborhood community character. So we have the tools available. So it's just how far do we want to apply it?
Well, with this starting point, as Rob has suggested, that the next discussion of this issue be done in a community forum. So Hillary and Ken, tell us when.
Michael, did you have an opinion on that?
we wanted to see what kind of feedback we get from you all this evening. We'll probably look at having that probably within the next month or so, hopefully. That's something that we talk with our communications and marketing community engagement coordinator with.
Okay.
We still need to figure out the best format to match up the information we presented to you for a presentation to the public so they can give feedback in an organized, coherent way for you all to digest and then act upon as well.
Right.
So we'll have more details for you probably in the next week or so. Excuse me.
There was a piece of information that I was hoping would come out in this presentation. And Frank, I don't want to steal your thunder. I had a very good conversation with Frank. Short-term rentals are not defined in our municipal code. And the piece of our municipal code that kind of dictates or is in an order of precedence, it's the table of permitted uses. And when I was talking with Frank, he guided me into some observations. And the observation was, where do short-term rentals fall in the table of permitted uses? And when you look at the definitions, all of the definitions that we have in our municipal code, the one and only place that I feel, Frank, I believe, is the one that pointed out to me, and I concur with his observation, is paragraph 18.06.288, which the title of it is lodges and inns. When you read the definition of that term, lodges and inns, and everybody needs to just think about, those are just some words. Don't think about what those words mean. I'm going to tell you what we've defined those words to mean. Lodges and inns means a building or group of buildings under single management containing rooms, parentheses, no more than 20, close parentheses, for temporary rental to transient individuals or families. So when I try to find out where a short-term rental would even be permitted in Woodland Park at all, based on the table, the only place that we could figure out that they would fall would be under lodges and inns, which does have a separate row in the table. It's row L, or what is it, 2 dot something, but under lodging, hotels, motels, but the actual term lodges and inns is its own unique row. So when you look at where are buildings and groups under single management containing no more than 20 rooms for temporary rental to transient individuals or families permitted, there's only 4 zones currently that they're even permitted. And those 4 are community commercial, central business district, I said service commercial, community commercial, central business district, and planned unit developments. Those are the only 4 that they're permitted right now. And I thought that was the huge aha moment I had when I was talking with Frank, that according to our municipal code, and it's the very first thing I would like to see addressed is fixing this table, is they're not even allowed in single family or multifamily or URs, urban residents. So if you start having the enforcement officers enforce the permitted use, we would be terminating all short-term rentals basically in Woodland Park, which I think would be a horrible move. So I'm hoping that one of the first things we can tackle, between the 2 bodies and the citizens is agreeing on a definition. And that's why I pointed out, this is a draft. Let us agree on a definition. And then even if it's a temporary until we can sort things out, establish legally where we know they're going to be allowed, as in SR or UR, where you have single family homes. just to establish some property rights, because I'm strongly in favor of property rights, but I'm strongly in favor of property rights as governed by what's in writing. And right now, in writing, we don't have any authority for short-term rentals, except those 4 zones, which is where they are not very many of them. So I would hope that we could address that pretty quickly so that we establish a foundation that here's your grandfather memorandum while we go through this process.
Rusty, to that end, the consultant that helped us put together the new comprehensive plan for the city was supposed to do a review of those 3 sections of the code and address a streamlined table for use. Are we going to see that? And could this be included in it?
Yes, everyone will see those recommendations for changes to the code. We just are not at a place to be able to roll that out and address that project at this point in time, just because of staffing levels. It's anytime you're potentially drafting regulation, part of what we do at a staff level in consultation with legal counsel is look at the ordinances holistically, so that we're trying to make sure that these different sections coordinate and don't create conflicts. So that would be part of that more holistic process, if that's a direction that that came out of this, was developing more regulations and standards.
So we have a lot of lawbreakers right now.
Well, that's the aha. It's like, oh, if we go strictly, I mean, the literal words, yes, we do. And that's the one thing I don't want, is to all of a sudden make a huge, jerk on a municipal code that has ramification. I mean, think of the 180-day, what that caused us, the previous council, when we too quickly, made some changes to the 180-day rule for some campgrounds. I just don't want to see an overreaction or a jerk
Sure.
like that again. Frank? There you go.
Thank you.
Frank does a lot of good research, believe it or not. Very good research.
And so we have about 10 minutes until the start of our formal council meeting. I guess what I would ask from this group is, are you generally in favor of our next steps? Our next steps would be doing some kind of public engagement outreach. Of course, you all will be welcome to attend that and encouraged to do so. And then we'll work on what our goals for that will be here soon. But before we do any other comments, we've got a few more minutes. Is there anything else you would like to see at this time, aside from those next steps?
I just have a quick question as to why, Rob, was there a particular reason you selected like North Glen or the areas that you did, or was it kind of just random?
So Colorado Springs is because it was in the local area.
Yeah.
And then the rest of them, Suzanne provided me with from our clerk's list
Okay.
that they all shared. And there were a few more that were just very similar, so I just left them all.
Okay. Thanks.
Michael, to Larry's point, there is a lot of work already done. And I wonder whether before the public meeting, we can't post on the website some of those suggested what other cities are doing, so that the community can look at those and see what they think about that, rather than thinking that it's just coming from the planning board and council, but there's some other thought that's already gone behind this, and let them have exposure to it before that meeting.
We can certainly do that. We might, we'll figure out how best to do that. We might append that to the minutes for this council meeting, and make sure, maybe do a news flash on our website. Some more folks can do that. We are fortunate in that our city attorney has drafted several such pieces of legislation, and will include the ones that we've cited here, whatever materials we have. And for whatever it's worth, if you want to do some of your own homework, this is a national issue. There's lots of stuff out there. We don't need to recreate the wheel. Anything you could possibly ever want to do, I'm pretty sure someone has done that somewhere, whether it's here or Texas or New York or California, it's been done. So I would encourage you to do that. And the possible policy approaches we've suggested are by no means comprehensive. I think that's kind of the gist of what I'm hearing here. So if there's more, we would want to tease that out at the engagement opportunity that we're talking about. And certainly we can, as we go forward in this policy process, by all means, please bring those to our attention.
Yeah, Rob, one thing here too, on the comparisons for other areas. I just like to see what some of the comparisons were for populations that are more near our population here and in mountain towns to see how, because like Buena Vista, they have a way that they do things too. And I think it'd be a good comparison because they probably have the same kind of concerns across the board with citizens that own them, don't own them, don't want them or want them. So and they've already been through all this, and I think that'd be a really good comparison.
I want to applaud the next step. I think it's very important to get the opinion of our citizens right at the get-go. We want to know where most of the people are thinking about this issue. Are they being affected? Do they think about they want to do this themselves? So I think by having that kind of a forum, public forum, get that information, then come back together as a group again to talk about what we learned and which direction we want to go. I think that's a great process.
Okay, very good. I think, is everyone all right? Michael? Like you wrapped up there?
I think we're wrapped up. Thank you all very much. Thank you to Rob for doing
Thanks,
a
everybody.
lot of work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Good work, Rob. Okay.